Those bills are set down for first reading. The House comes now to questions for oral answer, and the first question stands in the name of Jeanette Fitzsimons.
Mr Speaker.
Jeanette Fitzsimons.
My question is to the Minister responsible for climate change issues and asks, what analysis, if any, has the government done to determine the extent of cost-effective climate change emissions reductions that could be achieved within the New Zealand economy by 2020?
The Hon Dr Nick Smith.
Significant work has been done on mitigation options by the Ministry for the Environment, the Ministry of Economic Development, the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, and the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority. This advice confirms that New Zealand does have mitigation options, but these are more limited and expensive than most countries because of half our emissions coming from agriculture and a high proportion of renewable electricity. I urge caution from those who say reducing emissions is easy and draw the House's attention to the very significant increase in emissions that have occurred over the past decade.
Jeanette Fitzsimons.
Has he seen the Green Party's plan for New Zealand to reduce domestic emissions by 36.2 million tonnes by 2020? And if so, does he now accept that a 30 to 40% reduction target is achievable at modest cost and vastly preferable to enduring dangerous climate change?
The Hon Dr Nick Smith.
No, I have not had the opportunity to see the detail of the Green Party announcement, but I would note, it was only released at 1 o'clock today, I understand, but I would note that during the period that that member was the government spokesperson on energy efficiency, emissions grew very rapidly.
Nikki Kay.
Supplementary question to the Minister. What advice has the Minister received on the statement by those promoting a 40% reduction in emissions by 2020 that 100% renewable electricity supply is easily achievable by 2020?
The Hon Dr Nick Smith.
Speaker, I am advised that that would require first the writing off of $4.5 billion of thermal generation assets. It would also require $11 billion for the replacement capacity of 2,500 and an additional $2 billion for additional renewable peaking stations to ensure security of supply in a dry year. This amounts to a total capital cost of $17.5 billion, excluding the additional transmission investment that would be required, and this would amount to a 30% increase in the power price for all consumers. Going 100% renewable would also require the equivalent of another 7 Clyde dams being built by 2020. I don't describe $17.5 billion, a 30% power increase and 7 Clyde dams as easy.
Jeanette Fitzsimons.
Has he seen the Green Party's plan to cut emissions from energy by 5.25 megatonnes, which I sent over to his office this morning, which does not include 100% renewable electricity, but includes replacing the Huntly coal-fired power station with geothermal, wind and interruptible load as modelled by the Electricity Commission? And if so, does he accept that this is achievable and vastly preferable to enduring dangerous climate change?
The Hon Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, as I've said, I have not seen the Green Party proposals, but I would note that over the last 18 years, New Zealand's emissions from electricity have grown by 130%. And the member who interjects was actually the member during which there was a very steep increase in emissions. And the member asks, are they going down now? No. Over the record of the last Labor administration, thermal emissions grew hugely and there was a 3-fold increase in the amount of coal burned to generate electricity.
Charles Chauvel.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister think that the recent NZIER and Infometrics modelling on possible targets overestimates the cost of the different emissions targets, given that it assumes no increase in forestry plantings, that New Zealand business will face the full price of carbon when overseas companies will not, and uses different carbon prices for different emissions targets? And what other advice has he sought to remedy these emissions so that the government has an accurate picture of the real cost of a bold target?
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Firstly, I do acknowledge that any sort of economic modelling is incredibly difficult. Trying to make a pick, for instance, about the amount of trees that might be planted. At the time the Kyoto Protocol was signed, we were planting over 70,000 hectares per year, and nobody projected the huge drop-off in plantings that occurred after that. In terms of the analysis showing an increase in the carbon price with more ambitious targets, I think that actually applies reasonably common sense. That is, if the global community in the negotiations in Copenhagen goes for an ambitious target, it is reasonable to expect that will result in a higher carbon price. No economic analysis will be perfect, but I assure the member that the government is getting as wider and as accurate advice as possible in making this important decision for New Zealand.
Nikki Kay.
What proposals has the Minister seen for reducing emissions in agriculture that would enable New Zealand to achieve a 40% reduction in emissions by 2020?
The Honourable Dr Nick
Mr.
Smith.
Speaker, I have seen proposals from those promoting a 40% reduction that saying agricultural emissions can be dramatically reduced through using a smart farming approach. These methods entail a 1/3 reduction in stock intensity, which would, of course, reduce emissions accordingly. However, the consequences for New Zealanders of cutting by 1/3 our stock of sheep, of cattle and of deer would cost approximately 50,000 jobs and $6 billion in export earnings, and would significantly reduce the living standards for all New Zealanders. Such policy options for agriculture are not being considered. Our efforts as a government are focused on investing in the new technologies that will enable emissions reductions while maintaining our important agricultural economy.
JEANETTE FITZSIMONS.
Does he accept the research done by AgResearch and Dairy New Zealand, which shows that if the milk payout price is less than $5.50, it is not profitable for farmers to increase their stocking intensity? In fact, they lose money. And that the average for the last 10 years has been $5.20, which is where it is at the moment, and heading downwards next year. And does he not think that farmers are actually becoming less profitable in increasing their stocking intensities to over 5 in some cases, with a lot of bought-in inputs that they can't pay for?
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
It is true that dairy farming has become less profitable as a consequence of declining prices for their produce. The issue of the intensity of agriculture, in my view, is not the solution to our challenge around climate change. We actually have to find the technologies of which we're able to maintain the economic contribution that agriculture makes while reducing the emissions. And in my view, the sort of proposals that are put forward by those promoting a 40% reduction in emissions and a huge drop by 1/3 in the intensity of our agriculture would have a devastating impact on the New Zealand economy.
David Garrett.
Supplementary to the Minister. What does the Ministry for the Environment forecast New Zealand's net emissions would be in 2020 under the do-nothing option? What does it forecast net emissions would be